Well, good evening. I'm Dennis Wimp. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees here at the library. It's a great pleasure to have so many of you come out and join us tonight for really a wonderful program. For many of us, memorable experience with Loons may have been with the movie Golden Pond, which was in 1981 with Henry Fonda and Catherine Helprin. Interestingly, the Rotten Tomatoes rating was 93%. So it scored very high. Loons are really an iconic species. It's the ones that are around us. They show the importance of the health of a neighborhood, of the community in which we live. And it's also an emotional experience for many of us. This island that we live on or that we visit is really quite a diverse place. There's that connection between the ocean and the mainland. At this time of year, there are millions of birds that are passing over us. Many are stopping here to rest. Some will continue, some will stay and nest. And we have this wonderful number of organizations, from the National Park to Jack's Lab to the Biological Station to the College of the Atlantic, all sorts of preserves and places of nature. I think we may have one of the largest per capita of naturalists of any place in the country. And their work is not just their vocation, but it's an avocation as well. And that's what Billy is doing. Billy Helprin, who is with us, he is one of those dedicated people who serve on this island. He says that his interest in wildlife is as long as he can remember. He has a bachelor's degree from St. Mary's University, master's degree from Utah State, where he was introduced to studying bisons. He's spent a lot of his time working with the large animals in Colorado and in Jackson Hole and even in Kenya. He moved to the island about 20 years ago and served for a period of time as the MDI regional steward for the Maine Coast Heritage Trust. Then 8 years ago, took over the responsibility of the Somes-Meynell Sanctuary here on the island. It was started in 1985 by Dr. Virginia Somes Sanderson, who was a direct descendant of Abraham Somes. She wanted to preserve this property from development. The property today is about 200 acres. But it also includes easements to private land that wants to be protected. Spring is a busy time in the wildlife area, particularly among loons, as you will hear from Billy. This is where they are monitoring, and he is monitoring the success of all the loons on the various lakes. Also the migration of alewives, which are coming up from Somes Sound to Somes Pond to Long Pond. It's where the beating are the pairs where they should be. Are they settling into their territories? Is there a third bird around that's kind of messing up stuff? What's going on with eagles? All of that is what Billy and the large number of volunteers who work with him are working on. So let me say to you, please join me in welcoming Billy Helprin.
Thank you very much. And all of that monitoring couldn't be done without a lot of volunteers. And we've got some of them here. One who you'll see some of his wonderful photographs is Ray Yeager, who's been a sanctuary volunteer for quite a while and fantastic wildlife photographer. And James Zorden is the assistant this summer. And we've got Rusty Taylor, who's not here, but he's going to be helping us over the course of the next 5-6 months. And Maggie Dennison, who was a assistant at the sanctuary a few years ago. We've had a lot of help, and there's a big group of people who watch loons on all the different lakes here on this island. And we'll talk about some of the specific locations and islands, but first start off with some basic background about loon biology and physiology and range and things like that. And I thought I'd start off with some of the sounds of loons. And do you know any of the names of them? Those of you who haven't studied loons before, there are 4 main vocalizations. And there's a great website for bird identification and learning basics about different birds. It's allaboutbirds.org. It's a Cornell lab site. But let's just start out listening to a few different vocalizations. Pause that for a second. So this is a male doing a yodel call. It says on here the song. He's probably not really happy to be singing here. It's a territorial defense establishment and defense sound that carries a long distance. And I have some photos I think that show they spread their neck out across the water and project that very loud sound that can carry for miles because loons have large territories. So this is talking to the other loons in the surrounding lakes or other territories if it's a big lake, and it carries a long way. But only males do this. It should be. So that's the one sure way in the field to tell a male from the female, because their plumage is identical pretty much. You can identify individuals. Okay, get another sample. So let's see what we got here. That's the iconic one you hear in the movies and stuff. And actually there's a separate sound. So that's a tremolo in the background. And the first one, this first one was a whale. W-A-I-L. That's the one we think of. Yeah. Let's go to, so we've got males doing the yodel. The tremolo can be done by either one. It can indicate agitation or disturbance or communication amongst the pair. So the context makes a big difference with all these vocalizations. But the tremolo is pretty specific to territorial defense and establishment. See if we got someone. That's the whale. Yeah. I think we're catching the end of this. So that's a tremolo. The pair, I could do that tremolo, the male and female, going back and forth. And that's the one sound you hear when they're flying over. They'll do this tremolo sound. They don't wail or do other things when they're flying. And I think we've got the last one. We've got some hoots. So this is communication in close quarters amongst the family, if they've got chicks or male and female, or sometimes in a bigger social group. Sounds like a dog barking a little bit, doesn't it? So those are hoots. And there are some other subtle sounds that they do make. The chicks, when they're food begging, make a strange metallic whirring sound, which is really hard to imitate. So those are some of the sounds. Tell me some of the things what you know about loons. Those of you who haven't studied them, what comes to mind about loons while I'm switching over to the other, throw something out there.
They'll fly a lot. And when they're breeding, is that right?
When they're right now they're establishing territories. And so they're going to want to stay put on that territory as much as possible. There are other birds that will be flying in and out. And so those that don't have territories will be flying, and here they can do it from the ocean where they can stay and come over to our lakes, which are close by. And so they're flying, but a bird that is on a territory is not flying very much. And so that means that their muscles atrophy some because they're not using the pectoral muscles to move around and travel. So here, let's look at these work. So here's the basic range, and the red is in summertime, seasons, winter, spring, summer, and fall. And so loons are distributed across the northern part of North America. There are mostly out in the prairie provinces in Minnesota, Wisconsin, probably have the most. And we've got a good sized population in Maine, and adults are fairly stable, probably around between 4,000 to 4,500 or so. The numbers of chicks is more variable, and we'll talk some more about that. And the loons that are closest to the ocean, like ours in Maine and over in British Columbia, are the biggest. The ones in the middle of the continent are considerably smaller. Almost looks like if they didn't have the same plumage, it look like a different species almost. Anyone think of a rationale for why the ones in here are a lot smaller?
That's food.
There's enough food there, but it has to do with moving their bodies
Fly,
a long distance.
yeah, they have to fly farther to go to the ocean or to the
Yeah.
winter.
So they've got to get from up here out of the northern latitudes where the lakes are generally, that this is changing somewhat the timing, but they're going to freeze. They can't stay there in the winter. So they'll have to move from wherever it is up here and either come to the Atlantic, or if you're in the western provinces or states to the Pacific, and sometimes coming down across the desert, down to southern California area. And we have birds on this side of the continent that will fly over to the Atlantic. Some will winter right off the island here, or they might go down the Atlantic coast, potentially down to not quite all the way to the tip of Florida on this side, but there'll be a lot in the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of the birds in the central part of the continent will fly over to here and then fly down along the ocean and get to the Gulf of Mexico, crossing the top of Florida there on their migrations down and back. We don't have many with radio telemetry on, so there have been some studies done showing the movement patterns, but I wish we had more, but we don't know exactly where ours from MDI spend the winter, if it's right in the harbor here, or if they go off of Cape Cod or off New Jersey or somewhere like that. And there are 4 loon species in North America. There's the common loon, and that's the one that we're talking about tonight, mostly. And you can see their range. So the yellow is migration, the blue is winter, and the orange is summer. And so they could be found anywhere in the ocean. And some of them there are some large lakes in the, reservoirs where birds might overwinter, like Lake Jocassee in the westernmost part of South Carolina. There's a group that's studying them there on a large reservoir. But there just aren't many lakes in the central part of the continent that are not going to freeze up. So they've got to basically get to the ocean. So these birds are, half their time is aquatic and half is marine. And even here for our birds, they can go from marine to aquatic, within the day, which is interesting because we're dealing with salt water and fresh water. And they actually have salt glands where the salt can be excreted if they're, to accommodate that change in the quality of the water. So there's a red-throated loon, which is considerably smaller. So the common loons are about 32 inches long. So it does vary, but from tip of the bill to the tail, about like that. Red-throated loon is about 25 inches, quite a bit smaller. We do have them that we see mostly on migration in the fall or spring in the saltwater near here. We have had some on the island a little bit. Pacific loon, which can also include the Arctic loon. You might see in some bird books that there's a 5th loon that's sometimes lumped in as a Pacific that's larger than the typical Pacific loon. And then there's the yellow-billed loon, which is the largest of them all, which is closely related to the common loon. This pretty little bird is a red-throated loon. It was found in the woods, a very strange place for a loon to be in early April in 2018, not far from Long Pond. And so it looks a lot different than our common loons, right? It has a much smaller bill, almost more grebe-like. And but notice that where the feet are attached and back here. And this is the same with common loons. They articulate to the side. They're not underneath the bird like a mallard or black duck that would be, or a goose that's walking. Yeah, their feet are off to the side, and that's for swimming. But this bird was seen in Long Pond fishing, and then a few days later was found here by a neighbor. Young loon, I checked it out, and my first thought was maybe it was lead poisoning that it ingested, but how it ended up in the woods downstream from the Long Pond outlet was kind of a mystery. So that was my first hypothesis, was maybe it died of lead poisoning, it crawled out and that was it. But we were able to necropsy it, so do an autopsy on the bird, and didn't find, and x-rays also, so no lead inside. But it did have, I couldn't see on the underside or any part of the body, any external wound. But when we looked carefully and peeled back the skin, you could see that it had been stabbed. And this is not uncommon at all amongst common loons or with other birds. We'll talk some more and show you some more pictures of that. But what likely happened was this little red-throated loon went into the core of the Long Pond outlet, northern Long Pond territory, encountered one or two of the territorial pair, and was, got in a fight, got stabbed from underneath, was near the outflow, went down and over the rocks and things downstream. There was some contusions on the neck, and then it was still alive though, because it crawled its way about 25 feet from the bank, and that was it. It was probably thinking, I need to get back to the lake somehow, like can't go upstream. So I think that's the most likely explanation for what happened to this little red-throated loon. So there are a number of species that can be confused with loons, including, so here's a common loon in breeding habitat, the black head, you've got the necklace pattern, the white spotted back. But one that's often confused could be the common merganser male. And I can do this too from a distance. They have a lot more white on them. You see the black on the side, mostly dark there, but they've got a dark head. They do have a red, thinner bill, but you can't tell from light. Light, like color is the last thing to use for ID because it's so fickle depending on what the light in the atmosphere is like, if the sun's shining, how you're interpreting the light. So a green head or a black head could look green or purple. You've all seen like a mallard male's head that looks usually shiny green, but it can look black or purple also depending on the light. Then there's common murre, which you see. So it's got a kind of a similar looking bill to a common loon, but it's a lot smaller bird. It should be in the ocean all the time. And we've got horned grebe, but loon is by far the biggest. Another one is the cormorant. And this posture of the bill tilted like that is pretty typical when they're at rest, where the common loon's bill is pretty much horizontal to the water. Now that's not always the case, but at rest it's kind of just like that. So these guys are built for swimming underwater. They're not built for walking on land at all. In fact, they really can't walk on land. And that means a lot to them as far as what they can do and where they can go and when they're in trouble or not. But you see where the legs are attached way at the back of the body. And they are going, they're articulating side to side like that. They've got really big webbed feet. And so they're super strong swimmers, and they've got relatively small wings, because if you had big wings to fold up, it would just create more drag underwater, which would not be good for them. Do you think of some challenges then for, if you got small wings and you've got a heavy body, what's that going to mean in other realms? It's tough to get airborne, for sure. Yes. Here's just like looking at the skeleton view of this kind of same thing we saw there. Look how long the leg bones are and the foot bones. Long neck, probably longer than, and we've got a specimen here, actually, to show you, since we've got that slide there. And I don't know if the folks online, Jake, you think they can
Yeah,
see?
yeah, that's good.
So I'm guessing what might strike you, looking at this, is probably a longer,
Oh.
so that is a longer neck than, you know, when they're on the water. And small wings and long leg bones and long toe bones. Yeah, and you can come up and look at this later on, but they've got a, let's see it on here? You don't see it this view here. We'll look at this in another photo, how the muscles are attached. So long neck, long legs, small wings. And they've got this this little crest right here for muscle attachment, for moving the legs really quickly and propelling them underwater. So because of those legs are way at the back of the body, so when I raise cool shots, flaps are down, the short tail is down, the feet are spread, just great drag. But notice how they're behind, they're not landing like a goose or a duck with their feet out front. If they did that, because they're so far back, they would just face plant and it would not be a good way to land. So they come in on their bellies like this. And they do it amazingly gracefully most of the time, not always. Because that's a delicate adjustment to make, to not have your head get plunged in. Oh, and you can see here, so this one is banded. You see that? So when they're flying, it's fairly easy to see the leg band. And this has got aluminum band, or we call silver over yellow stripe, black stripe on the yellow. And it's got a green with a white dot over white. This is the Echo Lake North female. So it's such a big help to know who's who year after year. It tells us a lot about their behavior and figure out what's going on in the dynamics of what's happening in territories. So that's Echo Lake North. The males, we banded this one, and the mate, he has an exact same, except the green band has a white stripe around it. So it takes some careful observation in the field to see it, or getting a photograph, which Ray or myself or other folks can get, and then you can zoom in on the computer to see what the band is. So here's these powerful legs. There's the last push off here. So this is one that's getting ready to take off, and they need a long runway to do it, depending on if there's a headwind or not. If there's not, it might be, you know, many hundreds of feet before they can get airborne. But you can see the curling and pushing off. So they are flapping and running as hard as they can, just like a jet on the runway. They just put down the throttle and go. They cannot just blast off if they're disturbed, like a mallard can, or even a goose in short order can be airborne. These guys can't do that because the wings are small and they are heavy. A male around here would probably weigh, if he's in good health, 13, 14 pounds, and a female around 10. Females can be big, and they can be as big as a male sometimes. We've necropsied some and weighed them that are, but males are generally heavier than them, but not always. So here's a juvenile that's starting to take off, and it looks a little bit different. We'll look at the plumage later, but you can see the footprints from before as it was starting to run and flap. So this is early on. They start to practice this starting at about 9, well, more like 10, 11 weeks. They're starting to run on the water and practice. And it takes them about 3 months to get to the point where they can fledge, meaning leave their natal lake where they can fly and they can feed themselves fine. So, and we follow them and study them all the way through until they leave or, into winter time. This is a little video clip here, and let me get this to work. So this is to show how maneuverable they are underwater. So I was in a kayak, and this one, and their sensitivities vary a lot. Some loons will come closer to you, like if you've been on Echo Lake, and particularly on the south end or the north end of Long Pond, they are pretty comfortable because they see a lot of people. There are others, even on this island, like the west side of Long Pond or some other territories where they're not as used to seeing people that much or that close, and they would not come this close. But it's different if they're approaching versus you getting closer in a boat. So watch it change direction here. So it's chasing fish underwater. I'll start again. And you can see his band's underwater, right? And then he's going right back to peering and looking for where the fish went. So here's Mount Desert Island, and we've got a number of different lakes, from Seal Cove Pond, which has one territory. Long Pond is our biggest lake. It's about 900 surface acres, and it has 3 territories. On Northern Neck Cove, Southern Neck Cove, and the north end. Then we got Echo Lake here, which has 2 territories most of the time. It has the past several years. This is Somes Pond, which is where the sanctuary is, so the sanctuary owns about 260 acres of the watershed around there. And then there's conservation easements on other properties, as Dennis was mentioning. There's Round Pond, which sometimes has a pair there, but more often not. And then we've got, we've got Upper Hadlock and Lower Hadlock. That is a multi-lake territory. So that's one pair that goes between upper and lower, and they nest typically on upper. But part of what is a good territory is made up of having a good nest site somewhere, and they're hard to come by on this island because you know how rocky the edges of most of the lakes are. We have a lot of miles of perimeter of lake, but hardly any good natural nest sites. We'll talk about what makes a good one. And an adequate food resource to potentially have the 2 of them and 2 chicks possibly. But that's not always, so sometimes from small lake places, one of the birds might go over to Lower Hadlock to forage, or it might go out in the Northeast Harbor and then come back, and they'll trade off. And we've got Jordan Pond, which has 1 territory, and oftentimes they have not nested. They have successfully a few times. And then we've got Eagle Lake, which is large, like 476 acres or so. That's one territory typically. There's just not many good places to nest, and they try different places and they don't always work out. So we usually have 11, Little Long Pond also. Where are you? Hard to see. Somewhere right here, it's kind of hidden. There's 1 territory there. So usually 11 territories. And they can come and go from, this is Somes Pond here, this is Long Pond, that's Somes Sound over there, that's Echo Lake. So birds that are trying to get a territory and challenge the residents, the only way to get one is to take over from someone else. So a male might try to displace another male, or a female to a female. It's not like a couple coming over and dethroning the current pair. They'll accept whoever wins out in those battles. But it's easy to come from the sound here, where you could be out of everybody's way as a non-breeding, non-territory resident, and challenge like at Echo Lake or somewhere else, which happens a lot. Ray has witnessed a lot of fights on Echo Lake, and the 2 pairs come together in the middle, and the dividing line of the territories on Echo Lake is north of Ike's Point approximately. And so that's a lot of times where they have these skirmishes with other birds, sometimes 3, 4, 5 other ones. a lot of times, almost every day, and even when they have chicks. So we're gonna skip ahead a little bit. So here's like the list of bands, which we can show you more later, but not all of them are banded. And it's Biodiversity Research Institute has been, they banned loons all across the continent and have helped with this project on this island for a long time. And okay, so here's, you can see there's a aluminum band. You see the numbers on it. So zooming in with the photo, you can tell this one used to have an orange stripe band above it, but that fell off. But we can still tell from this and the combination on the other side who it is. This is on the north end. This is Jordan Pond. Do you notice something else in the picture there? Little fluffy chick, like 1 day old right here, sitting next to the, this is the female. But both males and females nest and incubate eggs. They both do everything. So it's not just, if you see a loon on the nest, it's not just the female. And waiting for the next egg to hatch. They usually have 2 eggs, sometimes 1, very rarely 3. So when you see their white bellies, when they're turned on their side to preen, that's when you see their legs typically. And you can tell this is the Somes Pond female with yellow over blue stripe on the left leg. I don't think I have a picture here of him, but the Somes Pond male was banded in July of 2002, 21 years ago. And before you can get a territory, you had to be dominant enough. Probably takes until you're about 6 or 7 to be dominant enough to challenge to get a territory. So that means the Somes Pond male resident is probably in his late 20s. And we know of some, the oldest birds we know that are banded are in the Sini National Wildlife Refuge usually in the summer. And I think she's getting to be, she's in her late 30s, maybe 38 or so now. And they produced the pair of them, they split up last year, I think it was. They don't mate for life necessarily, but it can be for a long time until someone's displaced, or maybe you don't survive the winter. And so someone will fill the space when you come back the next year. So even in this shot here, you can see some color right there. There's a yellow striped band. That's the Echo Lake South male. He's got yellow stripe over silver on the right. Here's his left leg in some different, in a brighter light, and you see the blue over yellow stripe on the left. And there you can see color on, you see both legs there, that there's color. You might not be able to say what colors they are, but you say that's a banded bird. So they feed on, they're specialized for feeding on fish, but they'll eat crabs and lobsters and other invertebrates, leeches. But they eat a lot of fish. They're not swallowing, just like some of our other predatory birds, like it's a greater blackback gull. They have to swallow the whole thing whole. There's no chewing or anything. And because the gull could peck at things, like you've probably seen them with crabs or whatever, getting into it and then eating. But the loons are not on land unless they're going to mate or nesting. Otherwise, they're in the water. So they're not, they've got to just swallow. They don't have anything to work with, to pound against or something. So they're not fighting with others to get the fish like herring gulls might if there's a tug of war going on to try and get an alewife here down in Somes-Meynell when they're running. But they got to swallow it quickly. They're really good at identifying who's flying over and who's a threat and who's not. What bird is this? Who's an osprey with that kind of bent leading edge of the wing there. They do not alert to an osprey going over. They know that they're going to feed on fish and not on try to catch a loon. How about who this is? Water wings, and we can't see from the, this is shot straight up here. This is a 7-foot wingspan. This is a bald eagle. And loons are really good at identifying an eagle from a long distance away. If they're anywhere in the view shed, they could be a lot smaller than that. And they'll be looking up, and if they're somewhat close, they'll do a strident eagle alert whale. It's very distinct, very strong. And when I hear that, I start looking for the eagles because they have spotted somewhere. So, and of course, these guys are equipped with the curved bill and the strong talons. They could go after an adult if they surprised one and drown one, maybe. They couldn't fly off with it, probably. They'd have to swim to shore. But eagles do go after chicks quite a bit. So it's not all calm like this on our lakes, as you guys know, probably if you've paddled around, especially in the summertime. This is the east end of Somes Pond, summer night. Sometimes it looks like this, like the north end of Long Pond. And it can be pretty crazy, but that's a loon territory. That, you know, the pair on that end is dealing with that all summer. And not everyone knows how to behave around loons or what's appropriate. They don't even know it's a loon. They might think it's some kind of duck, or they might go over and try and feed it or something. So part of our job, and all of us really, not just, you know, sanctuary people, but is to kindly educate people about what's appropriate and what's not, and to not approach too closely. This is loon habitat too, not on the beach, but close by. This is Echo Lake Beach, and this is pretty typical. And right there is a loon on the nest raft. So there, and they can handle that as long as it's predictable and they know what the people are doing and they're not going to come too close. This is a balancing act kind of thing where you've got all the activity on the beach. You've got Appalachian Mountain Club Camp that's got activity there. The mouth of this stream that comes out here, it dries out in the summer. And so if they nest close to shore, that leads to problems. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So here's some basic postures of relaxed loons. Bill horizontal here, just like that. This wing flapping here can happen at the end of a preening bout. That's quite common for them to do a wing flap to get their feathers in shape. When the bird puts its bill up like this, and you see the forehead feathers got more of a crest to it, that's like something's bothering that one, or they're curious about it, or checking things out. See how the neck is extended here? So it's looking, it wants to see down the lake as far as it can to see who's there and if it should have something to deal with or not. This one here is sitting low in the water and it doesn't want to be detected. Get some other shots of that. And then if on a nest, they're crouching down like this, they're trying to avoid detection. And you see this particularly if there's a dog going by. They do not like dogs, even if it's a rodent-like dog, you know, like this. They'll put their heads down on the nest. So that's something of concern. And this posture here is called the penguin dance, which is a very alarmed bird, very unhappy, whether it's a boat that's too close or a swimmer or another, you know, threatening loon. They'll do this penguin dance and have their wings out like in a vulture posture and treading water and vocalizing. So they're not happy there. So here's what you'd like to see more calm. There's one chick that's probably here approaching 10 days old on the parent's back. This adult here is sitting low on the water. Right. And so I think this is the Echo Lake South female. She was trying to avoid detection and the male's probably up dealing with some intruding loons. And they both will go and deal with it. And sometimes they've got to leave the chicks behind. And the chicks know to go and hide in the vegetation along shore, and they will not come back out until the parents come back and call to them. Then they'll come out. Sometimes though, if an intruding loon finds one or the two chicks, they may try to kill the chick. And that is in an effort to try and disrupt the pair that's there, and is an effort to try and take over that territory, and that has happened here. So this is when you see loons out on the lake, and it looks like, oh, they're having fun, they're just enjoying each other's company, kind of, but Not here where they're circling around. Their, brows kind of raised, the feathers there, and their bills are pointed down. This one is alert and looking in the distance, and can you notice anything else about that loon, if you look carefully? Yeah, there's a wound right there on the neck. So that one's been stabbed or grabbed recently. So it's been in a fight. This is a wing rowing, which is used in chases where it's kind of like the butterfly story. They're going like that and using their feet, but using their wings to pull themselves through the water. They can go quite fast that way on the surface. They don't have time to take off really because they're probably being chased by someone. And I've seen this happen from Echo Lake Beach all the way to Ike's Point, just zigzagging up like 10 minutes, just chasing back and forth, left and right. And then this is with two females that have been challenging each other for territory the past couple of years. And then shortly thereafter, come back and do it again. So a tremendous energy outpouring, again, fighting for the territory. And while that was happening, the male was just watching. He didn't try to interfere or anything. It's for those two to figure out. And yeah. So here's agitated loons with their bills down. If they're like that, that's a face-off there. Here's a penguin dance that Ray caught with all the water splashing around. Here's one that's been something, got shot in the head sort of with the bill grazing below there. This is a breastplate. So underneath the under the muscle. Oops. So there's a carinate keel that's right here on the sternum. We don't have that, but for attaching muscle for flight, the muscle's attached to that keel. And this is a thin, bony area coming down towards the abdomen. And these are holes of loon bills from prior stabbings. Yeah. And those are some pretty big ones. And remarkably, they survive most of those. When we do necropsies, we can sometimes see 5, 6, 7 holes that have healed over. So that's probably, or may not be what killed it. If it goes in, far enough and goes into the heart or other vital organs, it could kill them. But we see this evidence all the time with dead loons, and we look at them. So there's a history of fighting it out that's quite common. So here's a spot where there's a nest right here. This is at Echo Lake, and that's where they started one year. They moved it a little bit further out. You can see where the loon is on the nest here. They like to be right next to the water so they can jump in the water and get away if there's a disturbance. But the problem is if through the summer, and this plays a role of what our weather is like each summer and then the climate overall, this usually dries out and becomes land. And so it becomes not so secure. Here's what an egg looks like, about 3.5, 3¼ inches long, speckled, pretty camouflage color, usually 2. But here's who would like to get one of those. Here's a mink, but an otter or raccoon or skunk or raven or eagle or something would love to find an egg. So nest wraps are used a lot of times to increase reproductive success by creating their own little island. They made this one in 2018, and it has aerial predator guard on it. It's like floating logs and put nest material on there, and they customize that to the way they want it. But that can raise reproductive success. So we mark off this with the park and the sanctuary, and others work together to get the word out. We've had a interpretive station down there when they've been nesting, and people can come over and watch with binoculars or spotting scopes, and we can talk to them about loons and their behavior and conservation. And this is what they look like on the nest there. This one is rotating the eggs, and you can see the feet are, I mean, standing up, there's no legs visible, they're way down low. But it's rotating the eggs for gas exchange. Incubation is about 28 days. So that's pretty close to that. Here's one chick that just hatched, and the other egg is not hatched yet. And that's the male in the water. And so he will start to feed that one right away. And for a while, they can both be on the back. Sometimes it's hard to see them when they're under cover of the wing. And then they start getting big where only one can be on, and eventually within 2 weeks, they're too big to be riding on the back.
So is that now or June or?
They'll be hatching. I mean, they're just starting a nest now.
Okay.
So add almost a month to that. Here's got a little pumpkin seed fish, which would be too big to feed the chicks, but they sometimes try to do that. This is a more appropriate size item to give. You see how small the little wing stubs are when they're just a few days old. Most of the development goes into the legs and feet for propulsion, and to the bill gets bigger so they can handle more food quickly. And then they start to get into their teenage years, weeks, days, and there will be food begging a lot, even though they can start to feed themselves when they're 4 or 5 weeks old. Parents keep feeding them, and they'll keep food begging all the way through until they leave the lake. They can perfectly take care of themselves. Some of you might be able to relate to this, children, but they will food beg all the time until the parent leaves or they leave. This is going back, this is from 2002 to 2014, the number of chicks from different lakes. It's highly variable, and each year is different with very site-specific conditions. So Somes Pond's been quite productive. There have been some years, though, that no chicks have fled from any territory on the island. And then in 2016, there were 17 eggs hatched, 15 fledged. That was incredible success. Everything had to go just right in all the territories for that to happen. But like last year, we had 12 that hatched and only 5 survived. And mortality from eagle predation and some failure to thrive kinds of things, and some unknowns. But so I think this is an adult feeding chick here. So you can see the chick come over. It's got a little fish. And that chick's getting up to be probably like 9-10 weeks old. So this is what you oftentimes see at a distance, just two adults and one chick surviving. This is the southern neck, the northern neck cove female 2 falls ago. And she just died here. She's banded, she's got blue over white. This is her before we necropsied. We x-rayed, radiographed before. And do you see these very white, very dense objects? That's part of a lure. And you can see the little metal piece there that was part of that. So she died of lead poisoning. And there's a couple ways that that can happen. So this is what was in her gizzard, the muscular stomach chamber. That they take in stones from the bottom because they need to grind up the fish bones and crayfish exoskeleton, and they can grind up amazing things. They can grind up fishing hooks if they're not stainless steel and break them. But the lead they usually can't get rid of, and within a few weeks they're usually done with going downhill behaviorally before that. And so the stones are grinding the sinkers, sinker or old jig. I think I got some other shots in here. This is another one we've necropsied recently. You can see right there, a metal object, which we found out was lead. And here you can see stones in the gizzard, but there's also, for some reason, some in the pre-chamber, the proventriculus, because the esophagus coming down, the acid bath wash of the proventriculus and then the gizzard. So not sure why Those were up in there. And just a little closer up. There's a recent study, it hasn't been published yet, but Jillian Hosak, who's a vet student who was with us last summer, helping with necropsies from Tufts University, and Mark Pokris, who's a retired wildlife veterinarian, who's helped us tremendously, and he's necropsied more than 4,000 loons and trained so many people. He's helped do that with us. They were using rock tumblers for an analog for the gizzard. And just last week, I testified and others did before the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee of the state legislature, because of the loophole in our law. You cannot sell or use lead sinkers under, I think it's 1/2 ounce, or a lead jig that is shorter than 2.5 inches. But there's a loophole that allows for painted jigs to be used. But that paint gets taken off in the gizzard quickly, and this is a simulation of that. So they tested a whole bunch of different sizes. So here it's starting out, and going here to here, and so it lost mass. Lead is going into the blood system and throughout the body, and so anyway, hopefully they'll close that loophole and protect the loons and other birds. We can have injuries like here. There's a broken toe bone. We couldn't figure out exactly what happened with this one. This is a more obvious case of caught in this is along the ocean beach, so it got caught in a fishing net. Here's another situation where you see any issues here.
Just getting iced in. Sticking out her eyes. Yeah.
This was a couple winters ago. This is a juvenile. This is in early January. And the day before this, there was 0 ice on Echo Lake. None. It was wide open. We don't know if it was a bird that started out on Echo Lake or if it came from somewhere else and figured I'll just stay here and fish for the night. But overnight it dropped down very cold. And so the ice was, 1 inch thick or so. And it had just kept the hole open from moving around. So Ray was there with me Ray was on shore. I did a not recommended thing, but I went out by kayak a couple different times to open up this hole in the hopes that there's supposed to be a warming trend coming. Maybe this ice would go away. And so this was on the second day, that's the hole. That's what it was in. So it was in trouble for sure. This is a spot where it had been it was lining up in the hole, line up over here and then hit the gas, go and come across, but it hit the other side of the little opening. And here you can see it skidded through here and then aborted the flight and just turned back and came back into the hole. Of course, it's vocalizing, which is attracting eagles, and they visited for a bit. And but I made the hole bigger a couple of different times, and it was actually able to take off on the 3rd day in this hole, even without a whole lot of headwind. So it knew it had to go for it because it's probably getting more and more tired. So other efforts here, this is at College Atlantic, the science lab. We do necropsies about every other week. And there's lots of students that take part. Some of them are veterinary students to be eventually, and others just interested in loon biology and physiology. And so we've got some work study students, and myself and Edwin Barkdahl is a retired veterinarian. We're research associate status to be able to use the lab and things. So we learn a lot about what happens with loons that die, and we get them from Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and necropsy them and learn a lot. And we get tissue samples and send them to projects that are all around the continent for different things, from avian malaria and liver toxicity and aging studies and all kinds of things. So eagles are one of the potential predators. Other causes of death, lead poisoning is one of the top ones in Maine and New Hampshire. Boat strikes are another. This is not in Maine, but if you're traveling fast and a loon can't get out of the way in time, or it surfaces at the wrong time, we do see just blunt force trauma from boat strikes. This is not, so this boat's creating a large wake. And so it's moving slow enough that loon could probably get out of the way, but what's the problem with the big wake? So yeah.
Well, the nest here.
Yeah, during the nesting period, especially because loons have to nest right on the edge of the water. They need to be able to just go in the water and get away. They can't move back very far on land, or they'd be vulnerable because they can't walk. Big waves could knock eggs out of the nest or flush them, besides doing erosion damage. And so there's research being done, University of Minnesota and other places, on how these are wake boats, which some of you might be familiar with. They have ballast tanks on board, and they're intended to make a really big wake, so you could surf while at slow speeds right behind here. But those waves carry on for many hundreds of feet, and so that's going to become more and more of an issue on Maine lakes as well as it is in the upper Midwest. They're becoming popular, they're fun, but they've got some issues that follow. So here's, following a wake. So big waves coming to shore could be trouble for shoreline erosion, but also for effect on nests. Different diseases affect birds, like botulism, especially in the Lake Erie area over many years, and the combination of things with climate change elements and a type of bacteria that exists, Clostridium, that produces cysts that are usually just in a dormant phase. But when the water temperature and dissolved oxygen goes up, gets warm, and dissolved oxygen goes down, then those spores become active, and that gets ingested by little invertebrate creatures. Those get eaten by the next biggest, and moving up the food chain web. And so lots of water birds die from this type E botulism in different years. Other diseases include avian malaria. So the mosquitoes moving generally north as our climate warms in general. We're getting more and more species exposed to malaria, and we have had a couple that have died in the Northeast, but that might become a bigger thing. They can get fungal infections when they get stressed for whatever reason, and we see this on necropsy, where air sacs, so they have lungs and they have air sacs distributed throughout the body, and those oftentimes get affected by outbreaks of this fungus that just proliferates. We're all breathing these spores, Aspergillus, but we fight it off. But when loon gets stressed, that can take over and compromise their breathing and eating, and is a real problem. Other things for birds in the West. So there's a population in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, not very many pairs, but those migrate towards Southern California and Baja area. And there's very few lakes as you get down there and across the desert. Can you tell what these things are? Yeah, this is like a solar farm out in the desert in interior California. But what if it wasn't so rectilinear, what does it look like? It looked like lakes. And so if you're a loon flying over and you're like, oh, I'd like to take a break and go down, and you strike a solar panel, you're going to be on land. Now you need to be rescued, and you're a long ways from any water. So that's probably going to become more seen. So here's another. This is taken on a flight going from LA, flying across and looking down and seeing these things that just look like that. So that has caused some mortality in the Southwest. Other things we can do, just not having aquatic invasive species, invasive plants like milfoil or hydrilla and other things. So we have a courtesy boat inspection station at Long Pond, which we always looking for more volunteers if you would like to help with that. to just have boaters check their own equipment so they're not bringing things from an infested water body, which is usually more west and south of us to here. We don't know of anything we have on this island. But we need to try to prevent first, and if we do find something, act fast and detect it quickly. But this is the mantra of cleaning, draining, and drying your equipment to help stop that. As I mentioned before, nest rafts are used to try and increase productivity, and they do work, especially in places with fluctuating water levels. You know, the reservoirs and big ones in Western Maine, like Flagstaff Lake and others. Biodiversity Research Institute works on those and puts lots of rafts out as part of the mitigation for the power company. Like, okay, we gotta put water out, and there's a certain range that they're allowed to go during the breeding season. You can not only take it up this far or down that far, but by having a raft, it's floating up and down with that. So that's a way to help them out, especially where there's fluctuating water. And we had that here. Not only with just drying out and everything going lower, but sometimes big thunderstorms. Remember June 9th, 2 years ago, what happened between 3 and 7 in the morning? We got 6 inches of rain. And that did a lot of damage of park trails and other infrastructure, but also it flooded a bunch of loon nests. And if you're starting, right on the edge here, and then and the water's right there, and all of a sudden it's up here and you're exiting the water, you have to start over pretty much. They can't really move them there's no way for them to lift them and get them to a safer spot. So we have, you can come out and join us in the summer if you're here on Somes Pond, and we watch if there's a loon family with a pair with evening paddles, people bring in their own boats and go out and watch paddle boards, canoes, kayaks, and talk about loon behavior. That's a fun thing to do. We'll start doing that probably mid-June or later June. It's fun to do. And we do lots of walks and things. And there's going to be 3 of them at Little Long Pond this summer. I can give you the dates. I think the first one's June 7th. And we'll see if they've got chicks or not over there, if they're successful at having eggs. And I've got cards and things if you're interested in that, or I post on the Sanctuary Facebook page, and we've got the contact for that here in a second. You can see what's going on, but this is like the network here. And so lots of partners and volunteers, Biodiversity Research Institute, Loon Conservation Associates should be on here too. Anyway, we all work together to try and better life for the loons, but also as representatives of the whole system. And here's so I got a card, but that's Somes-Meynell@gmail is the email, and the Facebook page, I post things on that a lot. That's the website there, and a phone number. So if you're interested in learning more or helping out in any way, let me know. And I've got, if you're interested, some Sanctuary stickers with the logo, and pencils too, that actually both adults and kids, like it's got a loon, adult and chick, and they change color when you keep them on. So some of the kids hang on to them for a long time, so never sharpen them. But anyway, I've got a bunch of those here. And how we do? A little bit over. But we have time to do some questions.
Yeah, we are at 6:35. So how we doing? Yeah, all right. 10 minutes, yeah.
What are you doing when they bring in their legs up? It looks like they're waving at you as they're. You didn't.
Yeah, it's called foot waggle, and that's it. Some people say it's like for cooling, or that's a possibility, but they just are stretching their legs too, and the young ones do it, the adults do it, and we do get calls every summer that there's one with a leg sticking out its back, like it's been shot with an arrow kind of, and like they've broken their leg or something, but the way their legs are articulated, they can do that. It just be sticking up in the air like a 45-degree angle, or they're just doing that, stretching, and maybe the water's probably cooler than the air, so anyway, it's not uncommon for them to do that, like during a preening bout. Yep.
Have there been any interactions with all the Canadian geese that have been around and on the lake?
Yeah, there's more and more Canada geese around for sure. They get along okay. I've seen them, where like the geese have a nest and the loons are checking out, kind of like, I kind of want to be there, but I've not seen any aggressive interactions between them. So it seems okay, but, and the geese usually nest sooner than the loons do. So the geese are getting done. They're having their goslings, and we're gonna see some more. They've got a wider range, but, and the loons are just starting to nest. Yeah.
I have two questions. What happens to the challengers who don't get territory?
Yeah,
And then what happens to the fledglings? Where do these fledglings go?
Yeah.
yeah, so, the fledglings keep that juvenile plumage until their third summer. So they'll mostly be on the ocean. They might come back within 25 miles or so of their natal lake eventually. But they won't be tolerated, hanging around. But usually they're gonna wait and be on the ocean. And we have lots of loons on the ocean all summer here that are just non-breeders, both adult and most of the juveniles. So unless you can find a lake that's unoccupied or territory, that's a good habitat, you're gonna have to fight your way in, basically. And so here it's easy for them to go to a place where they're kind of safe zone in the ocean or Somes Sound or wherever, and come over and challenge on the lakes and go back. They don't usually come for that long. Sometimes it's an hour or two and then they leave. But that puts pressure on the parents that are there if they got chicks, leaving the chicks by themselves. That's difficult. And the other part, so what happened, the ones that don't have territories, a lot of them are going to be on the ocean or in interior bigger lakes. There are loons there that aren't territorial. And we see larger groups later in the summer when the territoriality diminishes somewhat, or on like Long Pond, which is big enough that they can be not in someone's core of their territory and socialize and be there for a little bit. Sometimes we'll see 15, 18 or something together, without a whole lot of fighting going on. So not so much territorial challenge, but just hanging out together, socializing a bit. But most of our other lakes are small and there's not much room for having others around. And so when there's a third bird or more, that can sometimes stop them from nesting if they've got to try and get that one out of there as much as they can. And sometimes they'll alternate between just paddling around together. It looks like they're all being friendly and everything. And then all of a sudden they'll turn and face or circle and do splash diving, which is very different than when they're fishing and peering down and going down gently. They'll, when they dive in a confrontation, it's very, very much splashing, and they all go down together because they don't want to be the one sitting on top who's going to get stabbed from underneath, right? Even though we know that happens. They're chasing each other underwater. So if you see going down together in an exaggerated way, they're not having fun.
They're not playing.
Yeah.
What's the procedure for banding them? How do you get
Going out at night on a moonless night, hopefully, and going out knowing that there's a pair there with chicks, because if they don't have chicks, they're probably not going to come in. So you can use a spotlight to see where they are, and it kind of disorients them like it does other animals. And sometimes playing a chick call, little peeping sound that they would come over and check out and get closer. And with a big net them, get them on board. And just for a few minutes where you can get a blood sample, which is used for different analyses of mercury and other things, and then put a specific combination of bands on left and right, which Biodiversity Research Institute has a chart of what goes where and keeps track of that. And then back into the water, and then they're fine.
They don't
With that.
bite you?
They're not happy for sure, and so and so if you're sitting in the boat, they're really strong legs, and they'll be crapping, and you gotta watch out for where you're sitting, but you kind of like have the head and neck gently but firmly under an arm and holding firmly across the wing, and then someone can work on the legs and the banding and stuff. Yeah. 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 Do you have any, I don't know if you have any online questions or anyone
No, not yet.
using the chat or anything like
Yeah,
that?
they wanted to unmute themselves. They
Okay.
get it's a awesome presentation, amazing photographs.
Thanks to
Ray just
Ray.
left. Did he?
Yeah, he went out, but yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
I noticed the draft that is not out on Echo Lake, is that kind of be going there?
Yeah, it is along shore. They know it's there.
Okay, on the shore. Oh.
It's close by and they've seen it. And usually the male there, he's excited to have it. We're not sure completely yet about who the mate is yet. But they usually start on the late side. And then we'll have the rope line, so that excludes the fish, the swimming zone and the kayaking, and hopefully people stay away and give them some distance there. Yeah, and so there's one over in west side of Long Pond, and there's one on the backside of Upper Hadlock. So those are the three that are out. And ideally, if there's a good nesting spot, then don't use a nest raft. If they got something that's good, then they should just use that, because they take maintenance and have to be replaced and moved in and out and all that stuff, and they're not, very cheap to make. So if they don't need one, don't have to. Yeah.
There's two only around Stones Pond a couple weeks ago, and they were very camouflaged. We didn't see the loon, but we knew they were there. And one person in the group had an app that they turned on that was a loon call.
Oh, geez.
And I said, I had never heard one before. I didn't know they
Yeah.
existed. And I said, please just turn it off. It doesn't feel right. It
No.
feels like it's gonna be distressing. And I just wondered what you thought about that.
Not happy.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's not good with any birds, like all the birds that are here to breed now, and they're setting up territories, whatever kind of bird. They're singing, and so there's the testosterone going, they're trying to establish a territory, even if it's a song sparrow or black-throated green warbler or a loon. If you play their song back, which is easy to do on all different kinds of apps now, they think there's another male that they got to deal with. It's like, God, crap, like now we got someone right over here to deal with. So it's stressful for them.
Yeah.
And that's not good. And it's illegal in the park. And good ethics would say you do not play it where it's audible for any species that's there. People do use it to call birds out, because another male will come over to see who that is. And so that's not good. And so all of you would feel empowered to explain that that's not okay. It's stressful for them, and they've got enough stresses to deal with. You can listen in your car if you want to learn what the song is, or think about it, or inside a building or something, or play it really low, but not out in the wild. Yeah. Yeah.
When is your next, was it June 7th, you said? What
I think it's,
was it?
You can check the Land and Garden Preserve, and I'll post on the Sanctuary Facebook page also when things are coming up. And I usually do weekly bird walks, nature walks, whatever we see, not just birds, but sometimes focus on loons. Oftentimes it's a Thursday morning, but we've got a bunch of school groups coming to check out the alewife and elver migration in Somes-Meynell over the next few weeks. So we'll have to adjust that time or day sometimes. And people who don't do Facebook can email and say, I'd like to be on the list for activities and things. And then I'll send out an email to people who'd like to participate. And we go different places, sometimes a sanctuary, sometimes in the park somewhere, or an Maine Coast Heritage Trust Preserve.
Is this stuff on your website or your Facebook or both?
On Facebook is if you're on that, that's the most updated. I've got to work on getting that on the website, but Facebook's most updated, and then the email list for activities and things. And I've got cards too that have my phone number and email if you want one of those too.
And I'll be doing the recording, and in that, when I post it onto our YouTube channel, I'll put the links down there as well, so to all the
You'll see
Facebooks,
that.
the emails and things like that. And I see here Wednesday, June 7th, from 9 to 10 a.m. And is it where is it?
Yeah, it'll be at Little Long
At
Pond.
Little Long Pond?
Yeah.
Is that a walk or a paddle?
It's a walk. Yeah, and we'll do that for 3 months. And hopefully watch progression of chicks as they get older and their family behavior and things. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe they won't be successful, but we'll still go over and check it out and watch what they're doing. And learn the intricacies. There's so many variations on what pairs do in different territories. Like the Little Long Pond pair, that's a really small little water body. Oftentimes, one of the adults goes over into Bracy Cove on the ocean side and feeds over there, and one adult will be on the pond. One year we had somehow one chick at 8 weeks well before it could fly, made it across the road and into the ocean with the father. And then the father fed it out there, and the other one, the female, left pretty much soon after that, and it raised itself mostly from about 8 weeks until 12 weeks. And it did a really good job, and it did fledge. So there's all kinds of things that are different every year in each territory. Last year we had the Upper Hadlock male ended up on the road alongside Upper Hadlock somehow. Don't know if another bird chased him, or I don't know why he was there. He was picked up and taken to Avian Haven, about an hour and 50 minutes away to be checked out. And they, I talked to them later, they put him in Belfast Harbor, the closest saltwater, and he was back. It took him a little while, but was back within 3 days. Because they had chicks, I was worried, like, okay, now the female just gonna have to raise those two by herself, which would be more of a challenge. So they split their time between Upper Hadlock, Lower Hadlock, and out in the ocean, even when they have chicks. The Somes Pond pair goes back and forth between Somes Harbor and Somes Pond, even when they have chicks, and they usually take turns. And we were one year able to follow the chick that survived over to the harbor and saw the father feeding it in the ocean, which was cool, which not many places where you study loons, you have the lakes right next to the ocean and can track that back to the marine environment. That was cool.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.